Welcome to Your Sleep Coach, the podcast dedicated to helping you reclaim your nights so you can live your best days. I'm your host, Devin Burke, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and the founder of Sleep Science Academy. I help exhausted insomniacs fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up energized using proven science-backed strategies and holistic coaching methods. So whether you're tired of tossing and turning or looking to optimize your rest for better health, you are in the right place. So each episode, we're going to dive into expert insights, practical tips, and real-life success stories to help you sleep deeply to live fully. No pills, no gimmicks, just the tools you need to create the sleep you deserve. So get ready to say goodbye to sleepless nights and hello to more peaceful, powerful, and present you. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of Interviewing the Experts. I'm super excited for today's guest, Cameron George, who is a researcher, writer, entrepreneur, and the founder of TruKava, a company that is striving to set the industry standard for quality, safety, and education around Kava within the mass markets. And since discovering the amazing effects of traditional Kava during his own chronic illness, which we're going to talk about today, Cameron spent many years investigating every aspect of Kava and has collaborated with many of the most prominent experts in the world within the fields of Kava research and historical Kava use. And I met Cameron at a biohacking conference a couple weeks ago and was blown away by his expertise and his product. And I'm so excited to share with you his knowledge on Kava and how we can use Kava to improve sleep. So welcome to the show, Cameron.
Oh, thanks, man. So glad to be here, man.
Yeah. So let's first just start off really basic with what is Kava. A lot of people listening to this probably have no idea. They never heard of Kava before. So let's just kind of ease into this conversation with you starting off with sharing like, what is Kava? What is Kava?
Yeah. Oh, no, exactly. Kava is a stress relieving plant-based elixir, basically. It's sort of a full, natural constituent mixture that's prepared from the roots. It's a drink that's prepared from the roots of a plant, a shrub-like plant that grows exclusively in islands in the South Pacific called Piper methysticum. And, Piper, literally is Latin for pepper. And it's in the pepper family, just like black table pepper is Piper nigrum. This is Piper methysticum. So the word literally means intoxicating pepper. It got that name back, decades ago, basically, but it got that reputation from an anthropological standpoint of being a truly viable, sort of safe, natural alternative to drugs and alcohol as Westerners saw it. But indigenous people in the islands have been consuming it safely for over 3,000 years, and they consume it virtually in every context, in the same context, that we consume alcohol or coffee in our culture, right? So, I mean, it really has helped to build out the social and economic fabric of all of these Polynesian islands over in the South Pacific. So when I say Polynesian islands, I mean, island chains like Fiji, one, right next to it that actually is where Kava first, was traced back to. And that's one called Vanuatu. Tonga, Samoa, Papua New Guinea, and even, yes, Hawaii, which obviously that's the place where, most of us are most familiar with. And so Kava certainly grows there as well, too. So, I mean, it's been consumed forever, and it's helped to shape the social fabric of these islands. And, it's consumed basically, like I said, in every context, like we would consume alcohol, anywhere where people are sort of getting together to sort of connect and open up and sort of build a sense of community and, personal interconnection and camaraderie. So circumstances like weddings, funerals, spiritual ceremonies, social gatherings. So, I mean, it's this broad spectrum, widespread, wide spectrum use natural product that's really, really helped to create a healthy mental and emotional fabric and a sense of community in, both individuals and in the cultures of these islands as a whole. So it's had massive relevance to the history and the shaping of the communities and the tribes in these islands, these tribes that turned into communities later on, as we sort of moved into the modern era. But from an anthropological standpoint, decades, even hundreds of years ago, whenever from all over the world started visiting these islands, we saw it for its context outside of just the sort of building sense of community aspect, because it's, especially as we started to sort of trickle into the modern era where we started to see a lot of the manifestations of modern culture and modern industrial culture, especially when once we went into the industrial revolution and on and down into the technological revolution, where we developed a lot of environmental based induced illnesses, chronic illnesses, what we see as chronic illnesses today, that really weren't a part of the lives of indigenous people in ancient cultures as much. They had a lot of problems with just lifespan and sort of like acute illnesses, right? They couldn't save themselves from a severe infection or like a severe accident where they got hit by something or fell out of a tree or got attacked by a tiger or whatever. But a lot of the indigenous peoples all around the world, including the islands of the South Pacific, come out of sort of modern culture and embracing the idea of better living through chemistry and fully diving into exclusively the pharmaceutical model of modulating disease, and also the whole advent of chemical agriculture and things, all of the factors that have really contributed greatly to the explosion of chronic degenerative conditions that we have today. But basically, so because we have so many of these chronic stress-based conditions, all of the neurological disorders that are stress-based, all of the autoimmune disorders that are stress-based, Kava has now sort of been rediscovered as a sort of very powerful acute and chronic intervention for modulating and processing stress in the human body.
So thank you for that. Everyone sit tight, because you're going to learn more about Kava than you ever probably could have imagined just in that one set, a bit there. Why has it taken so long for Kava to sort of come into modern society and start to be used as a medicine? Like, obviously it's been, like you mentioned, it's been used in the South Pacific for over 3,000 years. It's, what do you feel like? Why is it now? Most people still don't know what Kava is. They're just discovering. It's kind of being rediscovered, as you mentioned, and you kind of went into a little bit of that. But I'm curious, what do you think, or what have you seen has been the reason why this sacred medicine that has so many benefits that can help people with all these modern day illnesses, why has it been, up until like really recently that people now are just starting to discover the benefits and understand like this is a powerful medicine that can be used to heal?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and actually, it's a question that's relevant to almost every natural therapeutic intervention that we're starting to see sort of trickle into the public consciousness today. Because most of what we're finding now, from a natural therapeutic intervention standpoint in the worlds of either functional medicine or this advent of this sort of space that we call biohacking today, where people are learning how to change the environment in and around them to gain greater control over their biology. All the therapeutic interventions, from all the nutritional interventions to all of the the plant medicine interventions to even the adaptogenic herbs, and down into the technological stuff that's kind of harnessing advents of nature in sort of like a technological sort of potency amplified, whether it be the biohacking like devices, or whether it be stem cells, or some of these things that are coming. That whole category of interventions today that are really kind of being ushered in as a result of the pharmaceutical model sort of failing to address the chronic conditions that we're talking about, and it's not really great for anything besides symptom management. Basically that whole category of natural interventions, really, like every single one of those things that I just named are nothing new besides the technologies. They're just rediscoveries of something that has been used either ancestrally in isolated parts of the world, that has really come about through years of direct experience in direct use with these substances. Back before we even had the means and metrics to measure things like scientifically and see it in terms of parts. Most of the greatest discoveries in history, or that come out of the healing arts or therapeutic interventions, are all things that have been discovered over decades, even centuries, sometimes thousands of years of direct experiential use. So all the plant medicines certainly fall into that category. So we saw, perfect example of exactly what's happening with kava now that's happened in the last few years is with cannabis.
Mm.
We're kind of in the middle of this plant renaissance because there's a lot of these plant medicines that are being rediscovered today that now we're subjecting them to the scrutiny of the scientific lens and finding out what had been seen in the anthropological accounts for years and years past. We're actually starting to actually look at what the mechanisms been said by indigenous people scientifically, but it takes time for that to happen because a lot of times we tend to, especially like in modern culture, there was a period of time where we fully embraced, pharmaceutical medicine and everything that's just exclusively technological. And we kind of started to dismiss things that are natural because we didn't see them as very acutely powerful. And we didn't see them as scientific. We saw them sort of as just benign parts of like ancient life. But now we know that that's not true. So basically, the situation with kava and how it's finally being unpacked now is similar to cannabis. The effects of cannabis and hemp and CBD and everything that's exploding in the marketplace in the scientific community today has been there for thousands of years. And it's gone through its periods of not only being unknown, but it's gone through its periods of having unnecessary strikes in its reputation, and being drastically misunderstood, which usually comes from either power structures in politics and economics having a vested interest in it not being, or just ignorance and misperception. But kava is the same exact story. Cannabis, the effects were always there, and it was only about 8 or 9 years ago that it started, because we started to be able to pull apart and distinguish the safe ways of using cannabis and the safe parts of the plant and the safe types of the plant versus the ones that are actually not as safe for like chronic everyday use possibly. So there's just nuance. We discover the nuance, and it's the same thing with kava. We've had this sort of rediscovery of kava, because there have been some nuances in how to correctly use kava, over the past 20 or 30 years. So basically now we're kind of in this stage where we're starting to re-examine a lot of these things and starting to distinguish the best ways of using them, which are really the ways that they've been used by indigenous people for a long period of time. And it takes time to actually re-examine those, look at them from a scientific standpoint. And once we do, we found that what the indigenous people have been saying, about it has been, virtually mostly true.
Wow.
And so it's been sacred to them. And now we're starting to rediscover it.
So let me just make sure I'm tracking with you. So essentially, this has been used for thousands of years. It has an incredible healing potential, but because of modern medicine, it's sort of been suppressed. And now there's a rediscovery, and there is some science now. And I wanted to ask you about this around some of the scientific studies that are coming about around kava and the power of kava. But essentially, it's been suppressed. Essentially, this medicine that's been used for thousands of years has been it's been suppressed by the pharmaceutical industry, and it's now having this resurgence because the pharmaceutical industry is failing us, or people are starting to realize that medications that are synthetic, have very strong side effects that are dangerous. And so now there's a resurgence of looking to nature again for really healing. And this is where kava is playing a role and coming back into modern mainstream consciousness. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's been suppressed to some degree, but also it's just been misunderstood as well too. Because a lot of times you can't get the right answers to any question if you're not even asking the right questions, or you don't even know where to look to even find the right questions, right? So there's kind of like a lot of unknown unknowns, right? Like it's not even known unknowns in the sense that people are just looking in the wrong places. There's a lot of ethical, scientists and researchers out there that have just sort of been given the wrong model and to only look under certain stones, meaning only look to certain pharmaceuticals for answers, and to not really look at anthropological accounts and what has actually been proven out safe as a therapeutic agent for thousands of years. So basically, ignorance, misperception as well.
Well, it's fascinating to me. I want to know a little bit more about your personal story because obviously you know a lot about this. You built an entire company around Kava, which I'm excited to talk about. But tell us a little bit about like what got you so passionate about Kava. Like I know you shared a little bit about your struggle with chronic illness, but can you share a little bit about like was that what got you so interested in using Kava? Can you share a little bit about your story and how this kind of came, how you became such an expert on on a root medicinal beverage from the Polynesian islands?
Just like so many people that dial in on something that's very, very specialized and very, very specific, it didn't come out of me waking up one day, in my late teens, early 20s and saying, I'm gonna travel, around the United States, outside the United States, around the world, and I'm gonna dive into therapeutic plant medicines that are made from roots in remote islands, corners of the planet. It's like that was like the farthest thing from my consciousness whenever I was whenever I was a young adult. So it wasn't that. It was kind of a discovery that came out of necessity, right? Which is where a lot of things come out of. Now, I mean, my story of how I got into it is such a long, drawn out process that's been absolutely amazing, terrifying, difficult at times, but extremely meaningful. And so I'll give you kind of the small sort of truncated version here, but basically, we call it, from where I'm kind of, from the functional medicine community as a pain to purpose journey. It started with me getting extremely sick in my early 20s. I mean, I was one of these people that at the time wasn't so common, but now is becoming more common as we're moving into this age of, epidemics of autoimmune disorders and these really kind of unexplainable syndromes that are neurotoxic based, environmental based. But, back then I was kind of like one of these, we call them canaries in the coal mine, where I just had kind of the perfect storm of, factors occur in my life. Susceptible genetics, probably. I was probably susceptible to, in the right way genetically to, having the predispositions, and then got hit with a bunch of traumas and stressors back to back to back to back. Toxic exposures. I was in a moldy apartment, black mold infested apartment, got put on a bunch of pharmaceutical drugs, had several amalgam fillings, a lot of the things, today that kind of fill up a person's toxic stress bucket, which is a metaphor that we use in the world of functional medicine for describing how people get sick today. It really is an accumulation of stressors and traumas that fill up and that turn on bad genes and send you into the expression of your genetic weakness, which today is all the autoimmune spectrum disorders, all the neurological disorders, the psychiatric disorders. So basically, I had this series of things happen in my early 20s. It was prescribed a bunch of pharmaceutical drugs like amphetamines, antidepressants, and a bunch of things that really, wrecked me completely. I was in a moldy apartment, amalgam fillings, like I said, toxic exposure, a bunch of things. The bottom fell out. I got extraordinarily sick with one of these neurotoxic spectrum kind of disorders. And at the time, it wasn't near as common. And so it was very difficult to find any answers. And I got no answers from just like the standard allopathic framework. Of course, I exhausted that whole model, which was partly actually what made me sick, kind of treating the symptoms and going and taking the drugs, the medications and stuff. And chronically, those kind of drugs end up being a disaster in most cases. You end up at least ending up in a worse place than you started, which was what kind of even got me, you're sort of realigned to looking for, medicines that are more biologically compatible with our biology, which come from our natural ecology through which we come from. But anyway, so got put on all the drugs. My system sort of got obliterated, ended up with massive gut issues, ended up in one of these autoimmune conditions where I became extremely sensitive and highly, reactive to almost everything that I was coming into contact with at one point, meaning I developed massive food sensitivities, supplement sensitivities to chemicals, fragrances. And it got so bad, basically it's, they call it multiple chemical sensitivity, but it's like bad autoimmune, where you're so toxic and you're so sick down the autoimmune spectrum that your body can't tolerate or adapt to hardly anything. And basically what the reactions could look like was they would be either anaphylactic reactions, or I would go into full-blown convulsions and
Wow.
which got horribly terrifying because they started out relatively mild, and I didn't know how to address this process at its source to heal my body. I didn't know that I needed to reconstruct my gut. Didn't know I needed to work on my microbiome. I didn't know that I needed to detox. I didn't know that I needed to, get rid of bad cells in my body and to do some fasting and different things. I didn't know any of that. And so, basically it was a long odyssey of taking all the drugs, going down the allopathic model, getting worse, almost dying, and then going sort of towards alternative functional medicine and integrative medicine, traveling the country, trying different therapies and meeting doctors that helped give me a system that I could actually get my life back over time. It took years. But part of my process was I had to interrupt the reactive pattern that was going on that was keeping me sick, because every time I would react, it would cause inflammation. And I got to where I couldn't even tolerate the therapies and foods that I needed to get well. Right. So I had to interrupt that cycle. So at a time when I was on heavy doses of benzodiazepines and other drugs and things to kind of mitigate the convulsions, right, the seizures and things. So that was how I got on that. I got horribly sort of addicted to these, and that's a disaster that made it even worse. So I got to a point where I had a lot of strategies at my disposal, but I needed to find an exit strategy away from the drugs and to calm my nervous system down so that I would stop reacting. I could start tolerating foods. I could start sleeping and start to actually recover and integrate the things that I was learning. So I knew at this time, this was like years down the line. So I had spent probably about 6 or 7 years leading up until this point where I was just doing nothing but scouring medical and scientific literature and talking to doctors and researchers and scientists. So this is a long process. By the time I got to this crucial point, trying to get off these drugs, I knew that I needed to find a natural or plant-based alternative to benzodiazepine that I could help to prop up the same receptors that are being hit by these drugs, so I could safely transition and I could stop reacting. So basically, the pathway of greatest interest was this GABA pathway in the body. And GABA is a neurotransmitter. It's a pathway that's like the brakes of the nervous system. It counteracts adrenaline and glutamate and these pathways that cause convulsions and that keep you from sleeping and stuff like that. And so basically, I looked at every natural compound that was available in the scientific literature, and Kava kept coming up. I kept reading about Kava in the anthropological accounts and so on. And I had already tried Kava, actually, or what I thought was Kava, 2 or 3 years prior, because Kava is available in a form that's actually not TruKava. I found out later. It's available in a form called Kava, which is an extract form in the United States. And I got it, and it's not even widely known, but it is in the health community. And it didn't do much, for me. It was like mildly sedating, but for me, it was kind of like shooting a BB gun at a freight train, right? It wasn't enough to take care of, some of the issues, or certainly not enough to get off certain drugs. So I kind of wrote it off, but I was confused because what I was reading in the literature was so powerful. And what I was reading in the anthropological accounts was so powerful. And it was like this sacred substance to the islanders. And it was like this entheogenic substance too, that was minorly psychedelic and had all these psychological benefits. I'm like, I didn't get any of that. So it wasn't until I came into contact with an indigenous islander from the South Pacific, who I got to know pretty well from a supply chain standpoint. And he was like, have you tried Kava? I said, yeah, I've tried Kava. It didn't really do much. He's like, well, what'd you try? I told him. He sort of chuckled and said, well, that's not Kava. Like that's kind of a joke to us. Like, the Westerners think that they're doing something. It has to be prepared in a certain way. If it's not, it doesn't have all of its constituents there. And he didn't really describe it like that scientifically, basically, or not anywhere close. It's like a small shade. I'm like, okay. So he started sending me some of the fresh roots. He was even sending me some of the fresh frozen roots sometimes, but I'd get the dried roots as well, of a really high quality set of strains. He was sending them to me, and he gave me instructions for how to prepare it and all this kind of stuff. And so we started preparing it, and I was pretty instantly blown away. I was like, this is like night and day. This is like very like effective. I was really, really massively surprised. Within a few days, I was starting to get a massive reduction in my reactions. I was being able to tolerate things, within a couple of weeks, I was like, most of my, regular convulsions and like reactions to supplements were like reduced by like 85%, the kind of type of stuff. And so it was really amazing. And then in a very short amount of time, it was like it was giving me far more benefit than the benzodiazepines were, as far as being able to tolerate stuff, and was able to transition away from only, using that as a strategy, right, to control my convulsions. It was just more efficient. And so, so basically I was now in a position where it was like a miracle to me
Mm.
because it was like that gave me the leverage to all of a sudden I could tolerate all these foods. I could sleep. And so I started to gain a lot of my weight back. I started to progress in the healing process. I started to integrate all these strategies and was able to fast for longer periods of time because of some of the metabolic effects. So there was a lot of things that I was all of a sudden just able to do. And so that put me on the path to eventually getting my life back. So that's the truncated version of basically how I got into it. Once I got into it, that threw me into this direction of then jumping full force and figuring out how we could bring this in its true form and create a context in the modern marketplace. We could integrate this into Western culture.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for doing the work. I mean, and for it's always so inspiring to hear somebody that literally turns their pain into purpose. And now that purpose is to give other people the tools to heal. And it sounds like Kava was the missing piece in your healing journey, that when you really got your hands on some quality Kava, that really was the thing that allowed you to come back from your deathbed, from having convulsions and not being able to, tolerate food or water or anything, to being able to, start to heal. I feel like that's Kava was that sort of a turning point, if you will, for you. And now pretty much what you're doing is sharing that gift with other people. And I want to talk about benzos because, you know, I help people sleep all over the country. And oftentimes people, as I'm sure you're aware of, they're taking benzos. They're taking, all kinds of drugs to help them sleep. And I want to explore a little bit how people can, and I know you're not a medical doctor, so disclaimer here, but I would love to explore how people that are currently taking benzos and other sleeping medications to help them sleep, how they can transition to using Kava in a safe way. Like what would go, how would that work? I mean, how can you talk a little bit about maybe the chemistry around how it affects the GABA receptors in the brain, and sort of maybe kind of have a comparison for like how this can help people on benzos, because obviously it helped you.
Mhm. Yeah, no, totally. There's a lot more science that needs to be unpacked to fill in some of the mechanism gaps, but we know all of the general mechanism because kava is actually one of the most well-studied plant medicines or herbs in the world outside of cannabis, ginseng, reishi mushroom, a few of these all-stars that just have massive amounts of studies behind them. But kava has been explored for a long time in the scientific community. Mainly, to differentiate, and clear up some stuff around quality and which parts of the plant need to be used in certain things. But it's a lot is really understood about, generally about its mechanisms. And then we have tons of direct experiential sort of clinical observation data, anecdotal accounts, which are valuable when you put all of these different forms of evidence. You've got anecdotal accounts, you've got direct experience, you've got the scientific mechanisms, and all of those are forms of evidence that you use to sort of build your case. And there's nothing really more powerful than direct experience, honestly, because there's always even though we do need double blind placebo controlled studies, we do need a lot of these things to give it a highest level of credibility. But basically, as we've subjected it to the scrutiny of this scientific lens, we've started to prove out what the indigenous people have been saying forever about how it works in different types of language. So basically, and obviously, we can't make any, direct health claims, and certainly can't, tell people to come off of their medications, and that's not what we're doing. What we do is we share our experience about what we know about the science and what we've seen people do, and then people can make their own, decisions if they want to do this. Of course, speak with their, physician to try to work exactly how they can, strategize, because coming off of benzodiazepines and drugs is a very, very tedious situation.
Yes.
That benzodiazepines, opiates, these are both drugs that coming off of them, if done improperly, can be incredibly dangerous and in some cases lethal.
Yep.
And so there is a process there, but there always has to be room for the individual to be able to make decisions and to listen to their body and to try things that are going to give a higher percentage of perceived benefit, with the smallest amount of risk as possible, right? So you're mitigating risk, and so that kava fits into that category because it's well demonstrated to bind to the same receptors as these benzodiazepines and many others. It's well demonstrated to do it in a way that's non-depletatory, meaning it doesn't deplete the system like a benzo does and lead to having to use more to constantly stimulate that receptor to get more, to use more of the same substance to get the same effect, which is what happens with drugs. And because we know this, there's a pile of evidence that makes it a good strategy to look at and to work with. Obviously, if a person makes their own decision to do that. Now, in my personal experience and what we've seen clinically now reproduced many times, the main, like I had mentioned before, the main area of interest in the brain are these GABA receptors. Mm-hmm. But there's more receptors than just that. Kava is probably one of the most complete and full spectrum neuroprotective substances that we find in the scientific literature. I mean, cannabis is in there, but Kava honestly hits on every neuroprotective and stress adaptive mechanism that we know of almost, right? The GABA system that shuts down adrenaline and stress hormones, and glutamate. Glutamate is like excitatory, causes seizures and stuff. It needs to be carefully regulated. It becomes toxic if it's too high amounts. It's a sodium and calcium channel blocker, which is the same mechanism that a lot of anti-seizure medications use. And the significance of that is that during states of stress and trauma, you get this hyper influx of these minerals, of these electrolytes into the cell, like calcium, which rev up the cell and keep it going and cause this excitotoxic response. And it's part of that sort of excitatory thing that can lead to panic attacks and seizures and toxicity and different things. There's that mechanism. It's a profound anti-inflammatory COX-2 inhibitor, just like, Tylenol or ibuprofen, but non-toxic. It upregulates the brain's antioxidant systems like glutathione and things. So it's protective across the board, and all of those protective mechanisms help the body and the neurological system readapt while it's in a transitional period of trying to, sort of reacclimate itself to its own natural production of chemistry. Because what you're doing when you take pharmaceutical drugs, because pharmaceutical drugs are foreign molecules that are usually isolated from nature but synthesized, they essentially trick the body by being compounded in a certain shape that fits into a receptor, that basically tricks the receptor to do something we want it to do immediately, right? And that can be good, right? If you're talking about, general anesthesia or pain meds after a surgery or something, acutely. Chronically, it's a disaster because eventually the body recognizes that this is foreign and then starts to try to adapt. So it starts to shut down its own production because it says, whoa, something's going on here we didn't do. And just like if I were to walk into a factory and go to the fifth step on an assembly line, which, our brain and neurological systems is essentially like a really complex assembly line because it's a continuum of different systemed biological processes that work in steps, right? So if I were to go up to an assembly line in a factory and go down to step 5, right, like in a canning facility, or I was to go down after they was canned, we're putting the lids in the cans and just start taking the lids off the cans or changing something, it would mess up the whole assembly line. And then the people down the line in the next step would start to try to adapt by putting more cans on it or taking the lids off or whatever, So you see, that's a good analogy because you can mess up the whole synergistic flow of the machine, which is the body, by intervening long-term in this way. So with drugs, you're okay, let's take a benzo, for example. A benzo works on that GABA system. And essentially what it's doing is it's going and it's hitting the GABA system and pushing that button to where it's increasing the flow of ions or the flow and efficacy of that system is essentially kind of an agonist where it's massively having an influx or pushing that GABA button. But it's not doesn't work with the system where it's like teaching the whole assembly line how to efficiently produce the final product, which is GABA. It's intervening and just pushing more or dumping more of what we have in its stores. So basically, it's using up what you have. So you get the effect, but it's sort of like borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today. Like it's like your brain has a bank account of chemistry, and you can spend from tomorrow, just like I can go get a credit card today. And I can buy a car with a credit card. I'll be paying interest on it. And then it's going to screw me over tomorrow because I still have to pay for it. The money has to come from somewhere. Right. And so basically with drugs, you're tricking the body into using up its stores. So you get an instant effect, but because you're not feeding it at its base, you're not you're not correcting the problem. In fact, you end up in debt with your body's own chemistry. So you got to pay for it, and you will pay for it, because now you're twice as anxious tomorrow without the drug if you take the drug today, because now you have less of your own natural GABA, which you were already probably low in, right, to be able to handle it. So that analogy, the assembly line analogy with how drugs work and how systems work, and the bank account analogy is good for understanding how what we're doing, because a lot of people don't know that with drugs. They don't understand. They take a drug and they just say, "Oh, it makes me so good," right? But they don't understand, if they really understand what a drug is, and that it's not solving a problem. It's basically just charge credit, right?
Yep.
No,
I love this analogy.
Yes. Yeah,
this
exactly.
is an amazing analogy. It's
right.
I love analogies. I love metaphors because it just simplifies it for people. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, okay, now this makes sense. And so I know with Kava, like benzos, you need to take more and more. You're depleting the GABA receptors. That's how they become habit forming and addictive. Now, Kava has my understanding has a reverse tolerance.
Very amazing. Yeah.
So let's talk about now that we understand what, we have some great analogies. We understand what benzos are doing to our bodies in chemistry. Let's talk about what Kava does and how Kava pretty much does the opposite of that with the same effects, similar effects.
That's, and so that's great that we've got it set up there. So, if people have some context a little bit now what the pharmaceutical is doing, this is what separates pharmaceutical drugs from these plant medicines, right? So the plant medicine that I kind of touched on earlier is, plant medicine, instead of being like a single molecule that was synthesized in a lab or just taken from nature and we're trying to get this short-term effect to trick the body like I talked about, a plant medicine is actually a full living organism. And we as humans are full living organisms. And if you think about it, the same intelligence, no matter what you believe in as far as where, what shapes reality and what shapes, the network of the human body, we know that the human body is a network. Mm-hmm. And we do know that there is an intelligent system in this planet, a self-governing system that runs not only the natural ecology, but that runs your body too. That's why you don't have to tell yourself to breathe or tell yourself to blink your eyes or tell yourself to do these things. Happen naturally. There's an intelligent, you don't have to tell a cut on your leg to heal, right? So there's this intelligence there, and plant medicines are living organisms that have the same systems intelligence. So from a scientific standpoint, instead of one, little like compound that tricks the body, it's a whole system, just like, all the different systems in our body. There's all these different cell types. It's a system. It's a full assembly line, in other words. So it's not a person coming into the assembly line, changing one thing. It's an assembly line that helps to basically teach a larger assembly line how to work, or it syncs with it, right? It syncs with those things. And so it's something that has within it all of the information, all of the biochemical steps that are already shaped by this intelligence, which is the natural ecology that shaped the human body. So when you find plants that are a good fit for the human body, they're biologically compatible, right? So they weren't made by a human that just didn't understand a full system, like our body's full system, and ripped off one compound. It's something that's already shaped by the natural ecology. So people can start to understand that, especially today where there's more of an interest in understanding, sort of the realignment with nature, especially in this field of biohacking and people that are interested in, and, that reintegration principle. So basically Kava being a plant medicine, and being one that, that is fully compatible, it's very complex. It's got a bunch of different synergistic active constituents that work with the body in ways that we can't fully understand. Everything that I said just then is, was sort of a general overview or philosophical understanding. And we can't understand all of its parts because there's too many, but we know that the parts are a system. So basically when that comes into your body, that system as a full capacity sort of assembly line, it works on all of these different systems without tricking the body or causing the body to downregulate its production. So it's able to activate the GABA system while communicating with all of the systems that help to refuel it at the same time and to feed it, right? And because just goes back to the assembly line metaphor, it teaches all of the people in the assembly line, not just the person dumping the thing or taking the cap off the can, but it teaches, the people of how the people and machines who are shaping the can to reshape more cans. And so it actually has this effect of of this therapeutic effect of rehabilitating and strengthening what creates that final product, the GABA or the relaxation, as it actually does the actual, final product itself. So it's working on multiple different levels, right? Which is so cool. So what we find in the scientific literature, now that we understand that, is that, Kava, basically what we know about it is that it offers similar acute therapeutic effects on that relaxation and GABA system while giving a bunch of other, protective benefits. But it also helps to rehabilitate that system over time because of all the, layers that it's working on. So what we find actually now in the scientific literature over time when people take traditional Kava, that's really traditional, is we see an increase in GABA receptor density, the amount of GABA that you actually have, which is amazing because normally, something that gives you an instant effect, it's doing what I said,
Right.
earlier. It's borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today. It's charging on credit. But this is actually repleting the system while giving you this big upregulation and release that's acutely powerful and beneficial, like a drug would be. So this is really fantastic. This is plant intelligence right here. And it's extraordinarily complex plant intelligence. So basically the reverse tolerance effect that you just, alluded to basically is instead of, getting the most prominent effect the first time you take it, like with a pharmaceutical, and then getting less and less of effect because you're basically, like I said, and you have to put more cash in to get the same effect. This is repleting. And so you actually need less of the same substance over time to get the same effect to a certain degree. And then it levels off. But, so that's basically what the reverse tolerance is.
So let me just break this down for people listening to it. So essentially medications deplete us. They're essentially depleting. And what natural plant medicine, in this case, we're talking about Kava, what it does is it builds up the system. And you actually, as you take it, you actually need to take less of it to get the same effect versus with on the other side of that, with medication, it's actually, you need to take more of it to get the same effect. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Amazing. And so let's talk about, I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about sleep because obviously, this has big impact on people that have insomnia, that people have issues getting to sleep, staying asleep. Cameron, can you share a little bit about how people that are struggling with insomnia or struggling with their sleep, how Kava can play a role in supporting their mind body systems to connect to that innate intelligence so that they can retrain their bodies to rest and their minds to relax?
Sure. Yeah. So the same, so our circadian cycles that, that regulate our wakefulness and sleep are the same systems that are wired into our stress response, right? Because they're wired into our cortisol response, which is supposed to wake us up in the morning. And really, they're wired into that fight or flight response, which is supposed to make you awake and alert, which is an evolutionary adaptation that gets us to run away from a threat like a tiger, in the early stages of human evolution. And so basically any especially natural substance that helps to retrain and sort of defuse an over accentuated stress system by upregulating certain chemicals, downregulating others, reteaching the body and rebalancing the body hormonally and chemically is also going to help with your sleep cycles as well too, generally, especially one that directly targets the stress system, because usually the disruption in sleep happens an overly sympathetic dominant system. And what that means is the sympathetic is the fight or flight. It's like a different mode. There's two modes basically of the nervous system. It's like a switch. There's the sympathetic, which is fight or flight. That's meant to basically help you survive if there's a threat present. And then there's rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic is what helps to is what we need, to shift into. It's the mode we need to shift into at night. It's the mode we need to shift into while we're eating to digest. It's the mode we need to shift into for rest and recovery so that we can have the energy to spend whenever we need to go fight or flight, when we need to, get a task done, whenever we need to survive from something. So, so basically Kava, because it works on these GABA systems, because it works on the serotonin systems as well and the dopamine systems and helps to sort of balance brain chemistry and hormones and things, it does help to sort of interrupt that pattern and downregulate the sympathetic nervous system and upregulate and rehabilitate a damaged parasympathetic nervous system. And so, over time, it becomes much, much easier to shift into deep sleep, but also acutely, because you get such a powerful, quick upregulation of GABA, and serotonin as well. It helps to very quickly, even acutely, before you're like, rehabilitated, it helps, very quickly, to shift you into getting deeper sleep and deeper REM cycles. And that helps in the recovery as well, too. So it's a feedback loop.
It's kind of so I like the analogy here because it's like if your stress switch gets stuck on, Kava can be like WD-40 that allows it to switch back off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I personally I've been taking TruKava, your Kava oil since the show, and I've noticed my sleep is improved drastically. Like not, and I've been experimenting with all different types of supplements and all different types of biohacks for sleep. And I the area that I struggle the most in my personal with sleep is deep sleep. And since taking the Kava oil with actually something else I'm going to ask you about, because I know Kava is synergistic with other herbal remedies, which I want to talk about, but I've noticed a difference in quality of sleep. And that has led to a difference in more focus, feeling more, energized during the day, just even a little bit more delta deep sleep or REM sleep makes a big difference. And so this leads me into my next question, because I think this is just fascinating how this works. But so I've been using your Kava product, TruKava oil, with hops, a hops tea beverage. And I noticed when I combine the hops tea, and it's like it kind of tastes like a beer, but there's no alcohol in it, with the Kava, there's something going on when I pair both of them together. Can you
Yeah.
explain what's going on? Because this is like adding this combo of the hops with the
Yeah.
Kava oil. I'm like, when I do one, I notice a difference. When I do the Kava oil, I definitely have noticed a difference in the quality of sleep. It's great. And now I'm adding in this hot beverage with the Kava oil, and all of a sudden I'm noticing even more of a difference. Can you explain like why that's happening or what's going on there? Do you have any
Sure.
idea?
Sure. I mean, yes. I mean, generally. So Kava actually stacks very, very well with many of these other, more subtle herbs, sort of in the GABA inducing wheelhouse, right? So
Okay.
that includes valerian root, passion flower, lemon balm, skullcap, hops, and even some of the amino acids are like just taking straight GABA or taking taurine or theanine. And then, a couple of the more powerful ones actually that you may want to look into and try is magnolia bark extract, which contains a ligand called hanokiol, which is a GABA inducing agent, very powerful. And then there's a Chinese herb called ziziphus. It's a seed extract that's very powerful as well. Those two are my favorite to stack with Kava, even more so than hops and some of the other ones. So basically, how most of these things work is, several of them act as GABA transminerase inhibitors, and so, just like in nootropics, a lot of people are taking cholinesterase inhibitors. That basically means it prevents the breakdown of this neurotransmitter acetylcholine if it's a cholinesterase inhibitor. If it's a GABA transminerase inhibitor, then it prevents the breakdown of GABA once it's being induced. But these plant medicines do it in a natural way that doesn't like cause a traffic jam or imbalance your system. So basically, several of these things act as GABA transminerase inhibitors. So they allow the GABA that's being accentuated or induced by something like Kava to stick around longer, and you get a compounding effect. But then also, several of them help with the upregulation of certain systems that actually produce an intracellular amounts of these compounds, like GABA and other, that whether it be serotonin and some of these other ones that are synergistic. So a lot of these compounds act as kind of like the gas that helps fuel the production of more neurotransmission, like GABA, help it stay around for longer. And then Kava sort of acts as a little bit of the gas, but then it acts as the accelerator, right?
Mm.
So it's like you're putting more gas and then you hit the accelerator, then you get more of an effect, right? Because Kava really activates the receptors that make the bioavailability and speed up everything in that wheelhouse to kind of go. And so that's pretty, sort of a good analogy for that, I think, is why you get this compounding effect on this inhibitory system. So that, so basically, I mean, anyone who wants to experiment, who has trouble with sleep, sometimes Kava, the thing I like about Kava is it's the most powerful really in all of those compounds, those herbs. And it keeps working. A lot of these other herbs, if you use them by themselves, because the way they work, they'll work for a few nights and then you kind of get tolerance to them a little easier. Kava, because of the way it modulates the whole system, it keeps working. But if you use these things with it, if you cycle and say use valerian root with Kava for like a few days, and then cycle to passion flower, and then cycle to lemon balm, and cycle to, you can do some of these things and you can get a compounded effect. You can also dose magnesium with it as well too. So there's a lot. You can dose CBD with it that's synergistic. So for people in more extreme scenarios, we like to sometimes stack a lot of these things. Kava to me is the base of the sort of anxiolytic plant medicines, right? Of course, there's cannabis. Sometimes that's bidirectional, it's hit or miss. But as far as these things that go straight for the breaks, which is the GABA, Kava is really, it's kind of at the top of the mountain. And then you sprinkle in some of these other compounds around it to help bring it out more.
It's amazing. I mean, it's truly amazing what plants can do.
It really is.
It really. I want to talk about TruKava. I want to talk about the products that you offer. Obviously, you mentioned quality is a big thing that in the supplement industry, it's definitely not regulated. There's a lot of crap on the market, and unfortunately, people try things like your experience was you went and you tried Kava and you didn't have the effects because you had a poor quality product. So can we just jam on a little bit, like what makes TruKava true Kava? And then let's talk a little bit about, well, how can people that have sleep issues, how can they start to incorporate this to help them?
Yeah.
How do you take it? How much do you take it? When do you take it? So let's jam on that. So first, I want to hear a little bit about the quality, what makes TruKava, and then let's get into like hey, how do people actually use this that are having
100%.
sleep issues? Cool.
100%. Yeah. So just like I alluded to earlier, with all plant medicines, this is the case, but especially with Kava, because it relies heavily on this entourage effect of keeping all of the active constituents, ingredients together. If you start to separate the constituents out, poor extraction methods, then you lose a lot of its depth of the experience and potency with Kava. And that's true for all plant medicines, but especially for Kava. Like Kava, if you extract it the wrong way, it can kill most of the effects.
Okay.
So basically what we had to do with TruKava was to try to capture that experience of the full traditional Kava experience, capture that with certain extraction methods that we had to develop, and then stabilize it in ready to use in user products, right? That you could just take. Because the problem with the traditional prep is, just like I alluded to earlier, you have to prepare it. I didn't really go into that, but basically you have to like take this root powder that's the roots of this plant, and you have to put it in a strainer bag. You got to squeeze it into a bowl of cold water for like 30 minutes. And it's like, it takes like a long time. It's messy as heck. And then you end up with a bowl of essentially muddy. And so from a taste standpoint, people in the niche area of like biohacking are totally all over it. They're fine with it. But to make it available to the masses, people don't like the taste. And it's amazing that people won't consume something if it tastes bad, no matter how good the effects are.
Yep.
And just the time of preparing it. It's one thing to do it one night, but to do that every night on the go, it's not good. So in the past, you had to do that to get those effects. So we had to develop these methods of capturing that full constituent mixture in these end user products. So basically we started with our oil, which is the most subtle product. It's all purpose. Take it any time of the day. It's not too overly strong, kind of more runs in the background. Even kids can take it in large dosages. So it's the baseline for sort of food product. We don't use any solvents to extract it. Solvents are the quickest way to denature Kava. Solvents like ethanol extraction and worse like acetone and stuff. We use, a combination of pressure and water and different things, and then stabilize it in a certain way to where we're able to capture that matrix in our oil. And then we've got shots, which is the TruKava shot. The oil is called Kavaplex. That's our full spectrum oil, kind of like CBD oil, just with Kava. The shots is the TruKava shot. That's basically like the drink, just condensed down into a 2-ounce form. So you can take higher dosages with less volume. And, you don't have to pay a lot, for shipping on that. And then, coming soon, we have our TruKava drink that we had showcased at the biohacking conference where you and I first talked. That product is going to be released fairly soon, both in regional retail and, we're looking at online options as well. And that's like a carbonated drink. That's like a full-blown alcohol alternative. Really amazing. That one carries much of the euphoric benefits that really bring that sort of alcohol without the drunkenness type of feel and at the addiction, no hangover type of thing. So, the complex oil is more of like a therapeutic daily supplement. The drinks are more of like an alcohol alternative, and the shots are like the drinks. So those are our three products. Those are basically what we do. So the main differentiating factors is how we prepare it, that it's actually traditional kava. It's not these kava extracts. And then, the other two things are, every batch that we use, for every run of each one of our products is third-party lab tested, both for industrial and biological contaminants. So they're third-party lab tested for quality and safety. And, everything is tested as well to make sure that we have 100% root material, which we didn't really have time to go over, but that's important because the roots are the only consumable parts of the kava plant. If you consume the leaves and stems of the kava, it can actually be mildly toxic, and which has led to some reputation issues that you'll find on the internet about liver toxicity with kava, which only happens if you consume the wrong parts of the plant. So everything is tested to make sure we have the right parts of the plant, the correct strains, which that's another thing. There's many strains of kava, and we have certain daily use strains that we use. And then it's third-party lab tested for contaminants, and then we have our extraction method to get the full spectrum out of it. So those are our sort of, quality metrics that, that we use that you want to look for. And unfortunately, there's really no one else out there that's doing even anywhere close to any one of those things right now. We hope that changes as the kava market around the world in the United States really starts to take shape. And this starts to become a core part of the culture in a safe way that we can experience sociability, that's non-addictive and that doesn't lead to the kind of mental and physical neuroses that alcohol and illicit substances can use. So that's basically what's different about ours and how we approach it, and what's important to look for.
So what I hear you saying is you start with a really quality product. You make sure that the extraction methods don't denature that quality of the product. And then you created 3 different forms as of now for how people can reap the benefits without having to spend 30 minutes squeezing a bag of root powder and making their kitchen all messy. You just made it super simple for people to either open up the can, open up a shot, or use the oil without having to, ship in roots from the Polynesian islands. So thank you for that. I think it's really important to talk about, if there is any contraindications as well. I know that Kava, before I met you and listened to you on some other podcasts, as well as, our conversation we had at the conference, I was under the misperception or conception that Kava could be toxic to the liver, that it was, potentially dangerous for people to take it. Can you just speak, are there any contraindications for if you are taking high quality products like the ones that you produce at TruKava? Are there any contraindications? Should people be concerned about using any of these products?
So pretty much all of the known contraindications with kava are relative to its quality and how it's sourced from, and all of the the bullet points that I just kind of named with what we do on our products. And that was actually one thing on the conversation earlier that we were talking about, what has held kava back: ignorance and misperception. Obviously, political and economic, agendas by certain, companies, obviously, that would be competitors in the space and such. All that kind of, political stuff happens. But also this liver toxicity misnomer, which is basically has been fully vetted out in the scientific literature. It was something that happened in the early 2000s where a pharmaceutical company was actually trying to make a drug out of the active constituents in kava, which has always been the story, right? Okay. If you see something therapeutic, version of it, you don't want to sell it in its natural form that you can't patent. So they try to isolate its active constituents. So they try to take that living system and isolate its parts to make something that would be that lock and key thing that would turn it into something very different, right? So it turns it from that full assembly line into that little sneaky guy that goes in and screws up the assembly line that we talked about, right? And so it's just like you can't buy, or you can't create a caffeine pill with white caffeine powder and put it on Amazon and call it coffee, right? It's not coffee. And actually people die from caffeine powder all the time from overdosing. Like they go to the ER. Energy drinks that have synthetic caffeine in it, they're not like drastically unsafe, but you can overdose on it and you can go to the ER, and it's very hard to do with coffee. It's very hard to do. So because it's just different. It's the full food with coffee. Same thing with coca tea, which is a medicinal drink from Peru, right? They drink, the indigenous people in Peru drink it as a medicinal substance that's has the side effect profile essentially of coffee. But guess what its active constituent is? One of them, cocaine. But when it's in its plant form, it's this totally different thing. You're not robbing convenience stores. It's not screwing your life up over the weekend like synthetic cocaine would, or like the isolate, powdered concentrated version. So it's the difference there, right? So so this whole thing, with safety issues in kava has been fully vetted out over the last 15 years, and even the WHO has taken a position on it. There's no discrepancy about it in the scientific community anymore. It's really just still circulates around the internet. It's the same thing that had to be done with cannabis, right? Making this distinction between marijuana and CBD. It's like the difference between synthetically isolated, kava-like material from like the leaves and stems, wrong parts of the plant with kava, is as different could be from the traditionally prepared food drink made from the roots of this. Right? It's a totally different thing. So that was a quality control issue there. So basically, most of the contraindications in answer to your question are going to be with quality issues, right?
Okay.
And so if you get kava in its food form, the only contraindications are possibly consuming large amounts with alcohol, which that's even just a theoretical thing because of basically because of the some of the active constituents in the roots that are actually very medicinal in high dosages, but the same enzyme that breaks down pharmaceutical drugs in the liver and alcohol has to break them down. So if you take large amounts of that with alcohol, then you could cause some sluggishness in the liver and things possibly. There's that potential, but with the food form, everything is balanced, and so it's kind of self-regulating, and it's actually very good for the liver. What we're finding out now. So that's even called into question. When you get the food form of kava, it actually has one of the best therapeutic effect to drawback ratios of any plant medicine that I've seen, which is why I love it, right? Because every plant medicine has, there are some medicines that are very acutely powerful, like psilocybin or like ayahuasca or like cannabis. But if you use them too much, then you have contraindications. They can imbalance you a little bit psychologically. They're not daily use. They're not tonic herbs. You don't want to be drinking ayahuasca every morning with breakfast. Please
don't.
It's not a good thing, but acutely it's good. Now, on the other end, you've got the really subtle herbs like the ginsengs that you can take all day till the cows come home, and they have a very low contraindication standpoint. But they don't have that acute power, that like really gives you an instant effect. Like, you know what I mean? Like a drug would. Kava is amazing because it's kind of in the middle power, but a very, very low, contraindication sort of, spectrum of effects. So the only things are there's a small percentage of people that can have, allergic reactions to some of the constituents, but that again, mainly comes from the tannins and the root fibers that in our products we've mainly filtered out.
Okay.
So potential for allergies in a small amount of people. Mast cell activation in a small amount of people. That some people can get skin rashes if they have large amounts of over a period of time. And then if you get poor quality stuff, then you can have all kinds of issues, right? Inflammatory issues.
So setting aside the quality. If it's quality stuff, it sounds like there's very little contraindications besides somebody maybe that's an alcoholic and that's taking large amounts of it based off basically. Okay. So we know it's safe. It's efficacious. How do you say that? It's
efficacious.
Thank you. And now there's an easy way of getting a really high quality product. And as we wrap up, I just want to ask, for people that are interested in trying one of your products specifically for sleep, whether they have issues getting to sleep or getting back to sleep if they wake up, what would you recommend and how much? So would it be, hey, sure, try the oil to, start with 1 dropper full, 2 dropper fulls? No, let's do a shot. Like guide us a little bit on, let's say I have insomnia, I'm having issues getting to sleep, or staying asleep. Like where should I start?
Yeah, absolutely. So, right now, until the drinks are available, the 2 products that we have available are the oil, the Kava oil, and the shots. So it all depends on what you're trying to get out of it. If you're looking for a daily tonic to kind of dip your feet into kava, the oil is best as a starting point for most people because,
Okay.
first of all, from a cost standpoint and from a practicality, you're going to get, 30 doses in one bottle. So it's like a month's worth unless you're taking higher dosages. I always tell people to start with 1 to 2 droppers full once a day of the oil. See how kava is going to affect you. Start to build up some of that cumulative effect that we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and then move. You can double or triple or even quadruple that because it's in its food form.
Okay.
So you kind of have to listen to your body, and then you can kind of get the general effects of kava in a more subtle form. And then if you want more of the recreational, social effects of kava, or just that extra punch or that extra kick on top of that, then I would recommend getting the shots.
Okay.
And start to sort of layer in some of those. But the oil is a great starting place for most people.
And the onset time. So when should people take it? At dinner, with food, without food?
The best time to take kava is generally late afternoon to early evening. However, people with anxiety and extreme conditions, people trying to get off of certain substances, things, a lot of people tolerate it very well in the morning. People tolerate it very well at night. I would say all kava leads to a good sleep, but these strains of kava are not going to knock you out, which is good. They actually increase mental clarity. So there can be a little bit of alertness that's with it. So you don't necessarily want to take it right before bed. I would take it about an hour before if you're going to do that. So it leads to a good sleep with your circadian rhythms, helps you kind of shift into it. Some people can tolerate it right before, but I would see how it affects you.
Awesome. Well, Cameron, we could talk probably for another few hours about kava. We're scraping the surface here, and I appreciate all your expertise on the quality of the products that you're creating, on what you're doing to share about this amazing plant medicine with people. It's amazing. I can get behind it. If it passes my test, I have very high standards for quality and things, and it passes my test. It's helping me personally. So I'm excited to, share about Kava with the Sleep Science Academy members, people that are going to be listening to the podcast and on video and YouTube. Where can, obviously, is it TruKava.com is the website? I'll put a link below. Yeah. And also you're kind enough to extend a discount to people that listen to this. I think it was 10%. So you could use Devin 10 on checkout with the products. But thank you so much for what you're doing, for having the courage to turn your pain and really into something that's giving other people an opportunity to get out of pain and to find a way to really heal themselves in a natural way that doesn't have all these downsides. So appreciate you, your wealth of knowledge. I know that the people that are going to listen to this are going to be very motivated to try your products and to try Kava out. And I'm excited for them because it's amazing. So thanks again for making the time and for what you're doing in the world. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Love being here. For any extra information, it's TruKava.com. That's TRU, not TRUE, Kava.com. And you can find us on social media, obviously Instagram at TruKava and just TRU Kava with everything. You search that and you'll find all of our stuff, more information about applications, how to use some of the literature and things like that. So yeah, I mean, this is, our company is definitely more than just about selling product. This is an advocacy campaign and a movement that we're trying to set around, changing the culture and the way that we interact socially, in more of a healthy context, and offering, basically this amazing therapeutic agent that has helped to successfully shape, the social fabric of the Polynesian islands in a very healthy way, and give them a sense of tight knit community and give them a sense of interconnectedness to themselves and their local environment, which Kava does through its psychological effects as well. So, we're very excited about it, and I'm just, so happy, to be here and help doing my part.
Yeah, it's clear that this is more than just you selling products. It's a mission, and it's very clear in how you're communicating that. And I'm excited for the world to start to wake up to the power of Kava and how it can create community and create openness and can help people, heal their bodies naturally, connect to their innate wisdom. So thanks again for that. And I look forward to continue to stay connected and continuing to see the amazing things that you bring into the world from the research that you're doing. So thanks.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Now, if you're ready to take the next step towards better sleep and want expert guidance, my team and I are here to help. You can book a free sleep consultation To learn more about how our proven approach can work for you, all you need to do is visit sleepscienceacademy.com to get started. And if you're passionate about sleep health and you want to help others overcome their insomnia, you can also check out our sleep coach certification program, where you'll gain all the tools and the training you need to guide clients to better sleep and transform their lives. So whether you're looking to reclaim your nights or make an impact as a sleep coach, it starts with one step. That's visit sleepscienceacademy.com to learn more. Thanks again for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next one.